Hello everyone, in today's video I will be narrating stories that I found off of Reddit. If you enjoyed this video, make sure you subscribe to my channel, like this video, and comment something down below. But without further ado,
let's get straight into these stories.
So for context, I grew up in the suburbs, and outside of the occasional play park or sports field, there was nothing to do. Lee and my neighbors used to play knock and run, or its other name, ding dong ditch. For context, I have a sister who is a year younger than me, and my neighbor James was the same age as me. His older sister was 14 at the time, and she also played with us from time to time, although I think she just wanted to hang out with my sister, whom she thought was cute. I was admittedly the biggest coward in the group, and to this day, my flight instinct is significantly stronger than my fight instinct, so I would never ring the doorbell as I would always find a way to wiggle out of it. I always found watching it more entertaining than doing it. On this particular afternoon, my cousins came over. One of my cousins was my age, the other was a few years younger than me and couldn't play with us, and the other was a year older than me, but everyone treated him like he was an adult, even though he was only 11, or at least that's how I perceived it. Let's call this cousin Daniel, as he is somewhat important to the story. My cousins came over, and we were banished outside to play, and we all decided that knock and run was a good idea. We usually just played around our immediate street, never venturing further than the next street over out of fear of getting lost in the coppice and pasted suburban streets. We made our way up the street to the play park on top of the hill. It sat where a house could have been, and someone could cut across it onto the next road. As we sat on the play equipment, we decided that a vote should decide who knocked first, and of course I was picked. I remember getting myself out of it and getting my older cousin to take my place. I am thankful that he was and is as proud as he is. They helped me get out of a lot of situations. We decided that our first target would be the fanciest looking house in the area, a white marble house with a fountain in the front yard and a curved driveway. I remember sitting next to a car. I was small enough to look under it from the curb, and I had a clear view of my cousin sneaking up to the door and ringing the doorbell 3 times in order to get the attention of whoever was inside, and he bolted down the pathway towards the street to hide behind the cars. But before he got to the fence, an older man in a black leather apron with what I assumed was paint came sprinting after him. I immediately knew something was wrong. This wasn't the usual response to a knock and run. Sure, we have encountered some angry people before, but this was something very different. He practically flew down the walkway towards Daniel and threw his hand out to grab him. This didn't feel like anything someone his age could do, and it scared me. I think I might have been the only one with a clear view of what was going on, which meant that I was the first to see what was happening. It wasn't until the man was practically on top of Daniel that he noticed that he was being chased, and the scream that he made when he realized this will always stick with me. As I said at the start of this, Daniel was and still is a very proud person who will always try to prove himself, so hearing this scream of pure terror struck at my core. Everyone was clued in at this point as to what was happening. Daniel didn't open the waist-high gate at the end of the path, he just jumped it, which I think ultimately saved him from getting hurt as the old man had to take a second to open it. Daniel was sprinting down the street as fast as I had ever seen him. "Stop, you little brat," the man shouted with a deep, angry voice, which did actually stop Daniel in his tracks. They were both standing in the middle of the road at this point, reminding me of an old western movie when 2 cowboys would be standing at either end of the main road. The man marched straight up into Daniel's face, and I could finally get a good look at him. His skin resembled rough leather, and the few strands of hair on his head had long since grayed. He was clean shaven, and he was wearing white pants, a white button-up, and a black leather apron that had what I rationalized as red paint on it. After he was maybe half a foot from Daniel, he started to berate him, and I could only make out the words "sick people" in there. Everything about this man threw me off, and I could see my neighbor and my other cousin, who was hiding in the bushes, felt the same. My neighbor's older sister, whom I will call Tay, screamed out at him from the other side of the road, which gave Daniel the opportunity to run as fast as he could away from the man. We all ran at that point. I don't think I or anyone else knew where we were running off to, but I found myself in the car park of the shopping center across the road from me. I waited there for maybe 30 minutes, just watching cars come in and out, feeling safer with the large group of people. I had no idea at the time if he chased one of us, but I knew that I was safe. I made my way back to my house and found that I was the last one to return. My cousin Daniel ran straight home, and Tay followed him. My other cousin and neighbor ran around the suburbs for a bit before deciding to go home. My mom was missing when I got home, and I realized that she had been told what happened. My mother is someone who isn't afraid of protecting her own, and she is one of the strongest people I know, so I felt pretty safe that she was aware and was off telling him to screw off. But when she got back, she seemed off. She didn't want to talk about it or anything, and any color from her face had completely drained. We slept at my neighbor's house that night because my mom wanted to talk to my dad about something something serious, and I think we all knew what it was about. Nothing happened for a while after that, not for a while, but my mom was a lot more protective of what we did outside. We were no longer allowed to play knock and run or go up the road without a parent. It really bugged my sister, who loved to play outside, but I don't think she fully understood what happened. I have a lot more stories about this guy, and I probably will write more because this has helped me get a better grip on everything that happened throughout that year. But I hope you enjoy the very first event in one of the worst periods of my life. Part 2. Okay, so before I get into the next few events, I think that it is important to address some things that I've read in the last post. I know that we were the ones who originally disturbed him, but I thought it was important to dedicate a post to that event as it kind of kicked off a lot of stuff. I will probably update this post with a few more stories just to get it all out there, but I just wanted to say that I fully understand me and everyone else's part to play in part 1, but I believe that the issue really began after that, which is what I'll show you today. First things first, I promised a few of you that I would ask my mom what the old man had told her last night at dinner, and I did manage to do so. She was surprised that I remembered what happened and tried to sweep it under the rug, but I kept pressing her for answers. I'm not proud of pressuring my mother into talking to me about something like this, but curiosity got the better of me. I know that that isn't an excuse, but I feel it somewhat justifies my actions, as a lot of you wanted to know as well. After I pressed her for more answers, she grabbed my arm and led me to my room before placing me on my bed. She sat next to me and told me not to repeat anything of what I said to my sister, my cousins, or anyone else who was involved with this man throughout that year. She finally opened up about how she was sitting at home watching television when she heard a loud knock on the front door. It was my cousin Daniel and my neighbor Tay, who looked terrified and exhausted. After letting them in and grilling them for answers, my mom was rightfully pissed that someone had spoken to them in such a way, and so she got up to go and confront the man, and on her way out, my other cousin and neighbor arrived, whom she also sent inside. She was concerned about where I was, but Daniel made it clear that I ran in the opposite direction of the man and that he would go out looking for me, which it turned out he didn't. My mom made her way up to the play park and saw the man pacing back and forth up and down his driveway. He didn't seem angry or upset. He apparently didn't seem like anything besides someone marching back and forth, which took my mother's mood from enraged to confused. She walked up to the front gate and let herself in, which made the man stop almost immediately and stare at her. I am surprised that she didn't turn back and go home at that point, because that's what I imagine anyone would have done. But as I said in part 1, I am a coward. The man marched up to my mom and started to berate with her about trespassing on his property, which she met by berating with him about terrifying some kids. This apparently went on for a couple minutes before he said something that terrified her. My mom didn't say exactly what he said because she said that she was trying to forget it, but he said something along the lines of, "I will show both of you what it feels like to have somebody on your property when you don't want them there, and then I'll shut those kids up forever." He tried to grab her at that point, but she quickly moved away and left his yard, swiftly walking back home. This really affected my mom, but that was the answer I got from her. I gave her a hug and apologized for pressing her to tell me, and we got back to dinner shortly after. It had been about a month, maybe a month and a half, since the first initial incident with the man. We hadn't seen him since, and I was forgetting about it until I went to the shops one day. For context, my parents had started to let me go to the shops by myself to grab little things for them. I was young at the time, and the shops were across the road from me, so getting there wasn't an issue. One day, my dad asked me to go and grab a loaf of bread for him. He gave me two $2 coins and sent me on my way to the shops. I was getting used to doing this on my own and enjoying my independence. I grabbed the bread, which was on the far side of the large supermarket, and made my way towards the registers. I stopped by the toy aisle and took a look at all of the low-quality, mass-produced action figures that I desperately wanted. This was part of my routine. Even now, if I wanted something but didn't have money to get it, I would just look at it. But on this occasion, I wish I had just continued to the registers. I felt two hands push me to the ground from my left. I was shocked for a moment, as I didn't fully know what had just happened. The sticky and dusty floor beneath me hurt. It took me a second to look at my attacker, and when I did, I immediately knew that this was very wrong. It was the old man from up the road. He had found me in the place that I had hid from him just a month prior. He started to shout at me, but I couldn't understand what he was saying. I don't know if it was the adrenaline ringing in my ears or his rage just taking over, but the tone in which he was shouting shook me. I tried to get up to run, and when I planted my foot on the ground to get up, he kicked it out from below me, which made me fall back on the ground. Thank God a staff member arrived at this point. They must have heard his shouting from across the store and come to check on what was happening. I didn't get a good look at the staff member, but I am thankful for them. As I got up to run with the loaf of bread in my hand, I could hear the man reacting to me getting away, and it took everything in me not to look behind me to look at him. But I knew that he was furious. I ran straight out of the store with the bread without realizing it and almost threw up from all of the emotions. I told my parents when I got home, and they both made it clear that I wouldn't be going on any shopping trips by myself from here on out. They didn't think about how me and my sister walked together to school, which in hindsight should have been something that they thought of. The trip to my school wasn't a long one, it was just over a kilometer long, or just over half a mile, but the trip was still tough on small legs. There were quite a few hills, which added time to our trip there, and the path went along a creek with nothing around it. It was nice and isolated, which helped relax my mind after school. Not long after the supermarket incident, me and my sister were walking home from school and just made our way to the beginning of the path along the creek when we saw a van that had been parked there for what I assumed had been a while. I thought it was empty, but as you could probably guess, it wasn't. We turned to enter the creek when the van door opened, and we heard someone shouting out to us, "Hey, do you guys want to drive home?" It was the man. My sister, who was always trusting of others, started to walk towards the truck, but I quickly held her back. "What's wrong?" the man said in a cheerful tone. This was very different from the unintelligible screaming from just the week before, and I obviously wanted nothing to do with this man. I quickly started to lead my sister towards the creek, and the man quickly scooted over towards the door. "Wait up, I will walk you home." I should have run up the hill towards the school, but instead I started to sprint down the creek. Looking back at this, I feel stupid. Daniel was faster than me, and the man had been able to catch up to them in seconds, but for some reason he didn't leave his truck. All I heard was another unintelligible scream and his truck driving away. My sister was beyond pissed that we didn't get a ride home and that we had to walk, but I didn't care. She and I were safe, and so we continued walking along the path. Thinking back to it, the path was beautiful and connected on either side to small, quiet streets, the perfect in-between of isolation. Sadly, my young mind didn't realize that the creek opened to two quiet streets, and so when I saw that same silvered van on the street at the end of the path, I froze. What could I have done? I felt powerless and had to take care of my sister, who was only now figuring out that this man may not have good intentions. I decided that the best course of action was to cross the creek and walk through the bushes to the other side. This was a beyond dangerous idea as there were slippery rocks, animals, and running water. This very easily could have injured or killed us, but somehow we managed. We climbed over logs of wood and under tree branches, through prickly bushes, and through large plants. But we managed to do it and crossed over to another road that we followed towards the main road, which took us home. Obviously, those two vans could have been different, but at the time I was certain they were the same, and even now I am not 100% sure if they were different. I only found out about this later, but my parents got the police involved at this point. But based on the fact that more stuff happened, I am going to say that they probably didn't do much. There were a few other things that happened throughout this time, like mail being stolen, our bins being pushed over, and the front door knocking at the early hours of the morning that we knew was him, although we had no real proof. There is one last thing that I will bring up before I end part 2. For context, my dad used to have campouts with me and my sister. We would sleep out on the couch, and my dad would sleep on a mattress on the floor. The couches we would sleep on were right next to the front door in the living room. We would watch movies with pizza or some other type of takeaway. It was really fun, and I remember those nights, but one particular night will stick with me. Everyone else went to sleep, and Naruto was on. I hadn't watched or read Naruto at that point, but I recognized the characters. I was sitting directly next to the large window that looked out onto the driveway. I was just enjoying doing nothing when I saw some movement out on the driveway, and so I looked out, and there he was, walking up to our front door, wearing his white pants and white button-up shirt. He was staring directly at our front door with such focus that it felt like nothing would break it, but something did, and it was me. He looked at me, and I could see in his eyes that it was funny to him. He simply held his hand up, waved at me, and then placed one finger on his mouth as if he were telling me to shush, and then he jogged away. I surprisingly fell asleep not long later. Now looking back and remembering what my mom had told me, I think I know what he was trying to do. Part 3, it was summer, and the local council decided to have a fair. The local council hired a few clowns, some face painting stations, food trucks, and bouncy castles at the local football field. Of course, me and my sister were beyond excited to go. For a young child, this was the hottest ticket in town, and my parents were happy to take us as it was just down the road and free. I remember the field being beyond busy, the crowd was difficult to walk in and even harder to see through, but we managed to find ourselves right next to a giant blow-up bouncy slide. As it was summer, the actual balloon of the slide burned to the touch, and the sun made me feel like I was slowly melting. Regardless of this, I must have spent at least 40 minutes going up and down that slide. I was having too much fun and didn't notice that both my parents and sister had gone missing in the giant crowd of people. I got down from the slide, put my shoes and socks back on, and started to make my way through the crowd. I didn't actually know where I was going, and I remember feeling incredibly anxious as I waddled around the fair. It wasn't until I felt a hand on my shoulder shoulder and then on my forearm that I felt a little safer. It was my dad. I thought he had found me. I couldn't actually tell whose arm it was, as the angle at which it was holding my arm made it difficult to look at in a crowd. The whole day was overly stimulating, and I wasn't thinking clearly. I should have known from how hard the hand was gripping me or the fact that it was leading me to the parking lot that something was wrong. I only really felt terror when I saw my parents running towards me, running faster than I had ever seen them run. Adrenaline immediately coursed through my veins, and I pivoted my body around and immediately saw the leathery hand on my arm and white pants. The link was connected in my mind as to who this was. My mother's scream was the first thing I heard, and the angry or annoyed grunt of the old man followed it. He started to jog with me towards his truck, but I had started to fight back against his grip. He may have been old, but he was stronger than any elderly person should be, and he was faster too. Everything about this man was wrong, and it may have been my young mind making it all up, but I still believed that something was very weird about him. No elderly person should be like this. At this point, I was only a couple feet away from his car, and as he opened the door, I felt two hands on my right arm that pulled me hard against the man's grip. The man's grip held on before my dad came out from behind me and slammed the old man's head into his car, which loosened his grip on me. At this point, my mother grabbed me and ran, and we went straight home. Apparently, they didn't notice me slip away on the bouncy slide, and they ran into some family friends who offered to take care of my sister while they searched for me. I don't know what type of person it takes to do something like that in such a populated area, but this man was not normal, not in the slightest. My dad returned later that night. He looked really roughed up and drained of all energy. From what I had gathered over the years, they got into a pretty brutal fight that ended with the police breaking it up. My dad didn't get into that much trouble considering that he had called the police on the man before, but they still took him to the station to give a statement. When he sat down on the couch, he looked exhausted, bruises forming all over and a cut on his lip and upper eyebrow still leaking blood. But he had a smile on his face, and I could hear him telling my mom that it was over. They were both hopeful, and so was I. A couple weeks later, my cousins came back over, and Daniel wanted to know everything. He felt like he was the main victim and deserved to know everything because he was the one that the man shouted at and the one that the man wanted to get the most. I don't disagree that the man would probably try to hurt him on sight, but it felt weird to me, almost like he was trying to take credit for something that to him sounded like a creepy story, but to my family was real. Anyway, we decided to go out for a bit. My parents trusted us because we were with my older cousin. We went up to the usual play park, which was across the street from the man's currently vacant house. Daniel was telling us all about how he swore that he saw him near his house. Keep in mind that he lives almost 3 hours away. I am not saying that he is a liar, but I am saying that he wanted to be part of this. Anyway, we were playing hide and seek. Tay, our neighbor, was seeking, and she had only just started to count down from 60. I always tagged along with Daniel because he always found the best spots. We ran across the road towards the man's house, and Daniel jumped the fence, which I immediately stopped at. "Come on," he said from the other side of the waist-high fence. "No one will find us." The house felt like a void that we would get sucked into, and I had up until this point refused to even be near it. But for some reason I agreed. I joined him in the man's yard, and to my shock, Daniel wanted to go deeper into his home, not just his yard. I made it clear that this was a very bad idea. Even if he was in custody, jail, or whatever, we would be breaking into someone's home. Daniel didn't seem scared by it, though I think the whole idea of being in the man's house seemed too attractive to him. We went around the side fence into his backyard. It was overgrown, almost like no one had been living there for years. I made my way towards his back window and looked inside. From what I could make out, he was a hardcore minimalist, only having a television, chair, fireplace, and shelf that housed some photos of a much younger man and some medals. He was a veteran. It changes nothing to me, but it explains his above average speed and strength, especially for his age. The sound of a door sliding open almost made me yell in fear. Daniel had found an unlocked sliding door and wanted to venture inward. I ran around to find him, but he was already inside before I could stop him. At this point, I was also curious to find out more, but I understood the risk of this all. It didn't matter if I understood it because I went in with him. The rest of the house reflected the living room. The kitchen had a fridge and a stove, and the dining room only had a small table with one wooden chair. There was no decoration on the walls or signs of life besides these sad reminders of how lonely the man had been. As I said, this changes nothing for me. I hate this man more than anyone can know. We made our way upstairs and found 2 completely empty rooms in 1 bedroom, a single bed with a bedside table filled with different types of weapons, a hatchet, a knife, and a knuckle duster. I had never seen a knuckle duster before, and I successfully fought the urge urge to take it and put it on. This was something that Daniel failed to do, as he almost immediately grabbed it, which I almost hit him for. We continued searching the house, and Daniel had the idea that he must have something weird in his wardrobe, and when we opened it, he gave a disappointed sigh as there was nothing inside except a few white button-ups and white pants. This especially creeped me out as he never wore anything else. We made our way back down the stairs and into the living room, and to our surprise, we missed the table that sat next to the couch. It was just out of view and only had one drawer. Daniel opened it and struggled to get it out fast, but when he did, we found something profoundly strange. It was a single photo. Neither of us could make out what it was, but we knew that it looked familiar. Daniel sat down in the chairboard, and it was only then that we heard Tay scream out that she had given up. Daniel shot up and sprinted back out to the backyard. We had both completely forgotten about her, but as I put the photo back into the drawer, something stood out to me about the photo. The fence was navy blue. This was something unusual in my area, and I knew of only one navy blue fence in the suburb, our side door entrance fence. This realization made the photo seem so much clearer. The white pebbles on the ground leading to the backyard, the cream color of the garage next to it, and the green bush at the end of the path. This was my home. He had a photo of my home. I quickly met back up with Daniel and Tay, and we went back home. I should have told my parents, but I was scared that I would be in trouble if they found out that we were in his home. I understand why we would be, but I still didn't want to live up to it. About a month after that, we were having another camp out with me, my dad, and my sister. Both my sister and my dad had fallen asleep with the television still on, illuminating the room. It was one of those weird situations where you were both really comfortable and really uncomfortable. That was my situation, and on most nights I love this feeling, but that feeling will always be tied to this night. I was drifting off to sleep as well, but I heard the sliding back door open slowly. I peered up above the couch and saw a silhouette of a man standing in the doorway. I froze with fear and started to cry. My dad woke up at this point. I am not entirely sure how. Maybe it was a parental instinct, but he knew almost immediately that something was wrong. He got off the bed and crouched towards the dining room, which is where the back door was. The other man had begun to walk slowly through the house at this point, murmuring to himself. To my horror, I recognized the pants, the bright white pants. So many questions went through my mind, the most prevalent one being how he was in custody. But none of that mattered because there he was, standing in my dining room, holding something. My dad charged him from around the corner and tackled him into the wall. The old man punched him in the arm, and my dad immediately dropped that arm. It was the knuckle dusters that Daniel was wearing. It was at this point that the lights turned on. I don't know if it was my dad or the man, but they came on, and my dad made a noise of pure horror. Both men were fully healed from their last fight, but my dad took a real beating. I had always expected that the old man had had his butt kicked, but now I am not so sure. My dad was standing in the doorway to the living room, shielding us with his body. My sister was awake and crying at this time, as was I, and my mom also ran down the stairs and immediately saw everything that was going on. The man had lunged at my dad with a thing in his hand that I could see was a hatchet. My dad threw himself to the side, and his other arm got grazed by the hatchet, drawing blood. My mom at this point leapt towards the old man and pushed him into the kitchen bench, which made him scream, but he was up almost as fast as he was down. He slashed at my mom and missed her, and my dad ran to the other room and started to call the police. My mom was dodging his slashes while also throwing things at him. Once she got to the knife block, she armed herself with 2 knives and threw one of them, and the handle hit him in the face, knocking him back. My mom took the opportunity and drove the knife into his shoulder, which made him scream again. He fell to the ground and didn't try to get up until the police arrived. After this happened, we moved not too far away, maybe just half an hour away. Even though we live so close to that place, we have never returned. As much as I have been tempted to go back and relive some stuff, for the time being, I am pretty comfortable staying here. Apparently, he paid bail and was staying in the hospital for a while before staying at somebody else's house. I know that he made his way back to his house before making his way to my home. It creeps me out to think that I could have been in his home at the same time as him. Well, anyway, it's been 10 years, and it's been something that's been on my mind for a while. I want to thank you all for hearing my story. If you're liking this video, all I ask is that you make sure to subscribe to my channel and like this video. Thank you. I grew up in a small town. The total population was maybe 2,000. Everyone knew everyone else, or at least knew your family members. It was a safe town with mostly middle-class working families. Nothing major ever happened and the crime rates were low. I grew up feeling safe and secure. To note, I grew up in the 90s. One summer day, my good friend Ginny and I were out for a bike ride. We were 11 years old. We were allowed to bike anywhere we wanted, as long as we didn't leave our town and wore our helmets. There was a new road being constructed in between the 2 main neighborhoods. The new road was to provide a shorter way of accessing the main road to get to the next town. At the time, the road was still under construction but was nearly complete. All that was left was paving and painting. Ginny and I decided to bike down the gravel road. Ginny and I were about halfway down the road. The road was about a kilometer long. At the halfway point, we noticed a man walking. He was early 30s and very handsome. I didn't recognize him and Ginny didn't either. As we got closer, he broke out in a big smile and said hello. We said hello back as he didn't seem threatening or scary. He asked us if we were having a good summer and we said yes. He told Ginny and I he was a photographer from a nearby city and was in town to scout out models for his new postcard company. He said Ginny and I had beautiful features. He said everything in a very flattering way that made us feel special. He said we could be models. He asked if he could take our pictures. He said we had the look he wanted and the scenery right now is perfect to promote the town. He said he knows he will sell tons of postcards and we could all make money. Ginny and I eagerly agreed. He got us to stand with our hands on our hips and smile big. He took a disposable camera out of his back pocket and began snapping photos. He took about 10 photos in total from many angles. I remember feeling a little uneasy and said we should probably go because we needed to be home soon. He said he would get in touch with our principal on the first day of school to give us some money from the postcard sales. We foolishly confirmed we went to the local elementary school, though it was the only elementary school in town so it wouldn't be hard to figure out. Neither Ginny or I remember to this day giving him our names. This is an important detail for later. Ginny and I talked about becoming famous on the way home. I told Ginny that I wondered why he didn't have a professional camera. She said she wondered that too, but we agreed cameras are expensive so maybe he didn't have a nice one with him in case it rained. That evening at supper, I told my parents about my potential newfound fame. They were horrified and got on the phone with Ginny's parents. The two sets of parents called police and gave statements. Police sort of downplayed it and said it was unusual but nothing criminal had happened. My parents had a long talk to me about safety, as did Ginny's parents with her. The following spring, Ginny and I were hanging out together, this time a little older and a little wiser and a lot more cautious. We were walking along a quiet side street, just talking about music and television shows. A minivan approached us and slowed down. A friendly looking woman asked us if we knew where Smith's Road was. We told her she just needed to drive straight for less than a minute and it's the first right hand turn. She said she was having difficulty finding it and would we mind hopping in and showing her. I instantly said no. Ginny also declined. Then the woman said it was okay because she knows who we are. She called us both by first name and said she saw us on a postcard. By now, we were both freaked out. We were on a stretch of the road that had no houses. The nearest one was about 100 meters away, and it wasn't common for people to have cell phones back then, so neither Ginny or I had one. The woman continued to ask us to get in her minivan. Ginny, who was normally super chatty, was staring into the vehicle intensely. Her body language was stiff and I could tell she was scared. Suddenly, and seemingly out of nowhere, Ginny screamed run. I didn't know what was happening, but I ran and followed Ginny. We ran off the road and through a field and into a yard another street over. I recognized the yard and house as belonging to a school teacher. We pounded on her door and she answered. We told her what happened, and then Ginny said something I will never forget. She said she saw the photographer man from last summer crouching down into the very back row of seats. She said she knew something bad was going to happen. Police and our parents were called. We gave statements and a vehicle description as well as descriptions of the man and woman. Unfortunately, the police were never able to locate them. Ginny and I never saw them again. We had some serious trust issues with strangers after those encounters. Always make sure to teach your children that strangers are not safe, no matter how nice they are. My situation could have had a much more unfortunate outcome if things had gone even slightly differently. I was about 5 or 6. I went to my local kindergarten and I was as carefree as a child can be, the greatest of my worries being if my mom forgets to pick me up from school. She never does, and every day we walked from school to home and vice versa since it was a good walking distance. We lived in a compound that's kind of secluded and mostly inhabited by old people or boarding students who went to the university near it. This morning started out like any other. My mom picks me up and we're walking along the small path in our compound along with 4 other people, 3 high schoolers, 2 of which were walking together, and a female college student. She was holding a handkerchief over her head because of the heat. The sun was high up and glaring in the middle of the day that you wouldn't expect anything to happen. But it did. We were quite far back from this group when I turn around and see a man join us. He's clearly not from there. He had a bright neon green bag in front of him which was slightly opened, one of his hands inside it. His clothes were kinda dusty, but most of all, he was glaring at us. It was just us 5 walking in this quiet compound, and my little self didn't think much of it up until my mom squeezed my hand hand and started speed walking. At first I was confused, but I knew the only thing that could trigger this was that there was danger behind us, and it came in the form of the stranger that was following us closely behind. I kept looking back discreetly and still he kept staring at all of us, getting closer and closer. I looked up at my mom trying to ask what was going on, but her low murmurs didn't really translate well for me, except my ears picking up on the word knife. That's when I felt my stomach drop. As a child, you only ever watch of scary situations happening on television, never really thinking you'd be in any real danger, but I was now in one, and my stupid little legs weren't fast enough. Factor in my mom's older age, she was around 50. Compared to our other companions, we were the easy target. We were pretty much at the back, but our house was near and I focused on that because if I thought about the threat behind us, my legs would feel like jelly and I'd end up slowing down. Still, I couldn't resist looking back. He just kept getting closer and closer, shortening the distance between us. I remember thinking about how I wanted to scream for help, desperately looking at these houses that seemed empty, wanting to go inside, but my mom's firm grip kept me going. Anyways, we lived here too. I never really knew if the others were aware of it, not much until later. One of the high schoolers left to a house over the basketball court, and further down the path, the pair veered off to a different trail that led to the main highway, so it was just us and the female college student. At this point, the man was also speed walking and catching up, but our apartment was merely a few steps away, and my mom and I dashed towards it, up the stairs and into the comfort of our own home. The man gave us one last glare, but he continued to walk. My heart was pounding against my chest. My mom had left me to lock the door while she stared out the window. She kept repeating, "He has a knife." I saw it. He's holding a knife. I run towards the window and catch a glimpse of the girl, still clutching that handkerchief above her head, looking behind her in fear and alarm as the man continued to follow her. His bright, neon bag in front of him, now wide open, his hand still inside as he kept getting closer and closer. I don't really know what happened after, only of my mom's recollection of the events. She had noticed the man suddenly come up behind us too, and her suspicions were raised when he didn't try to walk past us like the others but maintained a close distance between us. And then she saw the knife, hidden in his bag, holding onto it as he stared at us. I hope that girl is okay, and that man was detained or something, but it's been years now and I don't really know where to start. Don't really know if I'd like to. Sometimes I wonder what that girl must have been feeling and if she had escaped. Alright, but that's it. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, make sure to subscribe to my channel, like this video, and comment something down below. But as always,
Have a nice day.